Hello and welcome to this Manufacturing Management Ask the Expert. My name is Paul Fanning and I'm editor of Manufacturing Management. With me today is Fenella Stalbow, head of ESG services for Inspired PLC. And as you perhaps expect, we're here to talk about ESG. So Fenella, thanks for joining us. How is ESG a key part of manufacturers' overall business strategy?
So really, I guess with ESG, the whole concept of it is that businesses should be embedding it throughout their strategy. I think more often than not, currently it is overlooked when businesses are reviewing and updating their strategy. And that's a kind of across all sectors. It's not just manufacturing. ESG is kind of more than just looking at a company's impact on climate change. It's ideally there to try and help build sustainable, long-lasting businesses that can adapt to and possibly even help solve global challenges. So it's really key in terms of strategy progression and business development to make sure that we are integrating ESG in there. ESG itself is supposed to kind of encourage internal and external collaboration. The idea is kind of building best practice for businesses and kind of wider industry as well. And I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for businesses that do align their strategy with ESG principles. A couple of the main advantages that I think there are from embedding ESG are, first of all, improving operational efficiency. So the whole point of ESG is sort of making sure that you're streamlining your business and operating in a kind of the correct way. And part of that is looking at reducing waste, which has a knock-on impact on cost, etc. So there's some positives there. Another one is increasing competitive advantage. So showing your customers and demonstrating to them that you have kind of corporate social responsibility. And I guess it's kind of demonstrating where you're going above and beyond in relation to your peers. That can be great from a sort of selling point. And then the final one really is building long-term viability for your business. So it's that future-proofing element, making sure that it kind of stands the test of time.
Thank you. And if you could maybe tell us a little bit, what are ESG disclosures exactly?
Yeah, so I mean, it's fairly straightforward. It's pretty much a report that's providing data and information on environmental, social, and governance performance of a business. So it's there to provide insight onto how a company is operating and integrating ESG principles into their business. I guess there are sort of several groups of stakeholders that might be interested in that information. And most businesses will kind of publish their ESG disclosures online so that those stakeholders can get access. The first one, and often the biggest one, especially for those listed on the stock market, are investors and lenders. So they're using ESG data often to guide responsible investment decisions. So having that ESG disclosure is really important to them. The next one that I think is probably quite often overlooked, is employees. So they do often use ESG data to assess company culture. This is obviously particularly pertinent if you're looking to employ new people and kind of diverse new workforce. Often when people are applying for jobs, they will research company sort of ESG strategies. And then the final one, and often the biggest one, is customers. So a lot of them kind of are considering ESG criteria more and more when they're purchasing products and services. So, for example, in bids and tenders at the moment, we are seeing a lot of questions around social value and sustainability. So customers are interested in it.
Okay. And how can manufacturers get started with their ESG strategy and reporting?
I think as with everything that's kind of unknown, there's a bit of fear there. And the first hurdle is, how do you begin? I think we normally would advise that companies align with any already established reporting standards. So a good example is the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI. They've got a suite of reporting performance metrics that businesses can use to assess how their companies are performing. And that kind of helps them identify gaps then, which will then build the foundations of a strategy. So yeah, using things like GRI is definitely a good starting point. It helps to kind of identify where your gaps are, what the near-term solution should be, and what maybe the longer-term projects and investments are for future. I think quite often there is a bit of an issue with internal capacity, sort of time and resource. It's a big challenge for businesses, especially if they don't already have someone in-house who's looking at this. And it does, developing the strategy does require knowledge and expertise to make sure that it's coherent and aligns with the latest guidance. So if you don't have that knowledge in-house, then there are specialist consultancies like Inspired that can provide that necessary skills or the support for strategy development. And I would definitely recommend reaching out if you do need any help with it.
Brilliant, thank you. And finally, perhaps, what ESG trends should manufacturers look out for in 2024?
So, I mean, during 2023, we saw a huge increase in the number of companies that were required to report under mandatory ESG regulations, and we do anticipate that the same thing is going to happen over 2024 and even further afield until most corporations will be captured and required to disclose some sort of ESG information. There were some sort of new reporting frameworks and requirements that were issued last year that I think are going to become more prominent this year. So one of them is the Task Force on Nature-Related Financial Disclosures. So that's essentially an initiative that builds on the model that's developed by TCFD, so Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. It's essentially a framework to try and help companies to assess and disclose their nature-related risks and impacts. And again, there's a sort of set reporting structure to try and make it clear and consistent and ensure that all companies are kind of reporting the same thing across the board. With the nature side of things, it's focusing on things like loss of biodiversity, degradation of ecosystems, that kind of thing. So slightly different to the climate one, which is focusing on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So yeah, that's something that any organisations that are heavily impacting the environment with their operations should probably look at disclosing. It's not a mandatory requirement at the moment, but it's definitely something that businesses may be required to report on alongside TCFD in future. The other couple that we mentioned in our manufacturing article were the Transition Plan Task Force and the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. The Transition Plan Task Force is just basically some more guidance on how to develop robust net zero strategies. So that's more of a useful point of information for any businesses that are looking to develop net zero strategies. Go have a look at the TPT guidance online, because that could be a useful starting point. It's got a set of disclosure recommendations. And then the final bit, which I think is probably one of the most prominent things at the moment and one of the most talked about things, especially for manufacturing, is CBAM. So the EU last year introduced the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism in October. It's currently in its transitional phase, and the whole idea about it is that you're putting carbon tax on foreign imports to mitigate the risk of carbon leakage. So you're putting tax on products to make sure that manufacturing isn't moved outside of the EU as a result of less stringent policies in other countries. This is actually the topic of our next manufacturing management article, so there will be more information in that. But I guess as a bit of an overview, the EU CBAM currently applies to imports of electricity, iron and steel, cement, aluminium, fertilizer, and hydrogen. And the EU importers are required to collect data every quarter, starting end of Jan. So the first quarter is already passed, and start reporting that. And that will kind of become more stringent as time goes on and we move out of the transitional phase. So that's something that's definitely going to impact UK manufacturers, anyone who's exporting those energy intensive goods to the EU. The other thing to note is that the UK government has also announced in December last year that a UK CBAM will be implemented. I think 2027 is their sort of target year for that. Further details are going to be run through during consultation this year. So that's definitely something to watch out for. And again, there's a lot to kind of dig into here, but Inspired's definitely here to help out if anybody's got any further questions or concerns about that.
Absolutely. And that's all we have time for. So I'd just like to say once again, Fenella, thanks very much. And thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.